Hello class, welcome to week 4 of Language and Society. This week we will continue to look at the phenomenon that occur in multilingual societies, as well as ways to analyze language use and choice within those societies. Like last week, you will be covering much of this material in your reading, and this lecture is primarily designed to provide you with good working definitions of the concepts. I have included a PDF handout on each domains and social networks for today's lecture, which includes areas to take notes and write down key ideas. These are located right under the PowerPoint lecture on the course website, so please refer to these handouts when going through the domains and social networks portion of this lecture. With that, let's get started. Okay, today's lecture, good working definitions, refer to the handouts, and domains. Considering that we have mentioned domains in relation to pidgins and creoles, I want to take a moment to discuss domains specifically. Simply stated, domains are analytical units for the study of language choice. Domains provide sociolinguists a means of examining and relating an individual's momentary choice of code to relatively stable patterns of language choice that exist in the multilingual speech community. In non-diglossic communities in which many people are bi- or multilingual, they may choose to use different languages in different circumstances. For example, let's take a person living in Belgium who may choose to use standard French at the office, standard Dutch when out in public away from the office, and Flemish at home with family and close friends. So our question then is, what determines when and why a person from Belgium uses each of these languages in his or her repertoire? Sociolinguists seek a means of examining and relating individual momentary choices to relatively stable patterns of choice that exist within the individual's multilingual speech community as a whole. So we're looking at individual language choices and saying, how do those fit in with patterns that we see on a societal level, language patterns that we see? Joshua Fishman proposed the idea of domain as an institutionalized context of communication. The parts of domain include specified topics under discussion, the role relations of the discussants, and the setting of their communication. According to sociolinguist researcher David Crystal, he refers to domains as institutionalized social situations typically constrained by a common set of behavior rules. He focuses on location. For example, the domain of family is the home. And there is his definition there. Schmidt-Rohr postulated domain as spheres of activity such as family, literature, playground, and street, or press, school, military, church, courts, government administration, etc. So language choice fits in with each one of these spheres of activity. It's interesting to note that there is no fixed set of domains. Rather, domains are the set of activities which reflect the cluster of purposes, role relations, and settings. Thus, domains are culture-specific, and each culture will have a different set of domains. For example, here is a list of domains from East Cape Vogel in Papua New Guinea. So there is, in this particular culture, there is the home domain, the church domain, the school domain, village market stalls, village boat, which I think is a very interesting one, that a different set of language would be used in this village boat setting. It must be a very important part of the society. The garden, the court, the trade boat, another boat, and a feasting venue. So these are all domains within this society in Papua New Guinea. And on your handout, you have an area in which you can identify domains in your life and culture. And following the lecture, I'd like you to take a few minutes to think of the prevalent domains operating in your life and the behavior expected in each of those domains, including language behavior. So our language behavior and choices will change depending on which situations we find ourselves in. So we may not have a domain of village boat where our language would change on a village boat, but we do have domains within our own culture. I think sometimes it's helpful to relate what we're learning here, the principles, to our own lives. In every domain, one of the potential behavior requirements is in regard to language choice. A person is expected to use the appropriate language for that domain. Therefore, assessment of language use can be fruitful for language development projects. Think about if the community you're working in had a language or a form of language used in a religious ceremony domain. Would you want to use that form of language for your Bible translation? Something to think about. All right, we are going to move on now to social networks. You may want to take a moment and pull out that handout. We have seen that individual momentary language choices can be related to societal patterns of language choice by studying domains. Finally, in this lecture, we will look at one more way in which individual language choice can be related to broader patterns of language choice. So again, looking at the individual to understand the broader patterns. And we're going to do that with analyzing social networks. Studies primarily by Leslie and James Milroy, conducted in multiple countries, have shown that social networks are significant to the potential maintenance or demise of linguistic codes. And this is the key idea we're going to focus on with social networks, so I'll take a moment to read this bullet point again. Social networks are significant to the potential maintenance or demise of linguistic codes. But first, I think we need to establish what is a social network. People interact meaningfully as individuals in addition to forming parts of structured, functional institutions such as classes, castes, or occupational groups, within which domains of communication are also existent. Further, as the word network implies, there are social linkages between individuals that bind them together. There are two types of social networks. A dense social network is when each person to which ego, or the anchor, is linked in some kind of relationship. When ego is linked in some kind of relationship with one another. So here, ego is linked to mom, ego is linked to brother, ego is linked to sister, ego is linked to dad. But also notice that ego is linked to mom, who is linked to dad, who is linked to brother, who is linked to sister. So each one of ego's connections also has connections with the other people in this network. And that is a network that is said to be dense. A social network is said to be multiplex. This is the second kind of network. When ego relates to other individuals in a number of capacities simultaneously. Thus, ego might be the neighbor of his father, to whom he shares male clan obligations, elder board responsibilities, and family relations. Any person may be connected to ego in a single capacity. Such a relationship is called uniplex. An ego may relate to a small group of people repeatedly in a multiplex relationship, or may relate to a great many people mainly in a single capacity and have relatively uniplex network ties. Let's look at our diagram again. Here we have ego, who is a brother, a gardener, a musician, and an aid post worker. Okay, but then his connections, he relates to people in a number of different ways. So his father is also his neighbor. His brother is also his lay leader. His grandfather is also the fight chief and the historian of the village. So his grandfather is not just his grandfather, he has other roles in the community to which Ego relates to him. Likewise, his brother is not just his brother, he's also the lay leader of the church that Ego goes to. So he's connected in multiple ways to the same person, and that is a multiplex network. You may be asking then, what is the value of a social network in our context? A social network acts as a mechanism for exchanging goods and services, for imposing obligations, and conferring rights between members of the network. Social networks can have positive impacts in strengthening cultural values. When there is both dense and multiplex patterns of social relations within a community, then there is internal reinforcement of whatever cultural values are held dear across the society. The societal norms regarding language use are reinforced along with every other societal norm. In the case of a single language, dense and multiplex networks can serve to insulate speakers, isolating and protecting them from language contact pressures towards language change. The community whose language, culture values, and network relations are most resilient will be that community which has little contact with the outside and is independent of outsiders for all society roles. Social networks can also have a negative impact. When you have an increased dependence by members of the targeted ethno-linguistic community, an increased dependence on outsiders to fill roles within its society, then that society will lose reinforcement of cultural and linguistic norms accordingly. The number of relationships within its societal network filled by outsiders determines the degree to which the multitude of supporting relationships or multiplexity is reduced. The greater the number of roles filled by outsiders, the fewer the reinforcing network relations. And what this means is that in societies where there's a village driver and village trade store owners and village teachers and village headmasters and village health aid workers and village clergy and village police and village midwives, and if these are all speakers of another language, then what's going to happen is that the local people are having to use an outside language to communicate with these people who hold important positions within the community. There will be greater negative impact on the local language than in societies where the roles are filled by local individuals who speak the local language. Practically speaking, if the speech community in which you are working is characterized by cross-cultural independence, intra-community interdependence, dense multiplex networks utilizing the local language to meet communication needs, there will be a better chance at retaining the vernacular language than those communities who lack these characteristics. So here's the general principle of social networks and language vitality. The general principle is the more critical roles you have taken by outsiders, the greater the dependence on those outsiders, and the greater the negative impact on insider values, including values on language. So with this in mind, why would the principle of social networks and analyzing social networks be an important topic in the study of implementing a language development project? Why would analysis of social networks be important before you start a translation or a literacy project or a world arts initiative in your community? And you'll have a chance to think about that question a little bit more this week. And before we end our lecture, I want to take a moment to remind you that the first test in this course is due by Sunday night. You'll need to download the exam, take it, and email it back to me. Also, the first phase of your final project is due this week as well. So keep that in mind as you're completing your tasks for this week. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks. Have a great day.